Master of Kulits, Episode 1 to 5.
People filled the Martell family's mansion, eager to celebrate Zane and Freya's wedding. Expensive fabrics and fresh flowers decorated the hall, creating a festive atmosphere. It was a lively scene, and everyone was in a joyous mood as they chatted while waiting for the ceremony to begin. The moment has arrived. The host finally announced, "The bride is about to enter. Cue the music!" A string quartet started to play, and under the rapt gaze of the crowd, a woman in a white wedding dress walked down the aisle. Zane Martell smiled as he watched her walk toward him. As well as being handsome and talented, he was a gallant, respectable gentleman with a heroic aura. Even without intentionally releasing his vital energy, everyone could feel it emanating from him. When Freya reached the altar, Zane looked at her adoringly, and then he lifted the white veil over her head, revealing her beautiful, delicate face. Her eyes glistened as though she were holding back tears, and Zane's heart pounded as he looked at her. He almost couldn't believe he was marrying someone so perfect. Even the guests were astonished by her beauty, and hushed comments filled the room.
You look so beautiful. It's my honor to marry you today. I promise that I'll always be by your side, and I'll never let anything harm you.
Freya blushed and nodded shyly. Then she took 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to Zane. It was the custom in the Yarrow Kingdom for the bride to give a toast to the groom, she said with a smile.
To our marriage. I can't wait to spend the rest of our lives together.
Zane grinned as he clinked his glass against hers, and then he downed the bubbly liquid in one go. On the other hand, Freya held her glass but didn't drink from it. Instead, she just stared at Zane with a strange look on her face. When she saw that his glass was empty, the corner of her mouth rose into a sly grin.
Freya, why aren't you drinking? Is something wrong?
A moment later, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if thousands of sharp blades were poking at his insides. Freya let out a snort as she looked at Zane with malice. The loving woman he once knew seemed to have been replaced by someone he didn't even recognize.
Because it's not wine, honey. And looking at you wincing in pain, I think you know what it is.
She said, arching an eyebrow at him.
You poisoned the wine?
He asked incredulously in a strained voice.
I've always treated you well. Why would you do this to me?
How could you possibly think you were worthy of me? Well, since there's nothing to hide now, I'll be honest with you. I've been seeing your rival, Bram, and he wanted me to teach you a lesson. He said he was the only one who could practice the heavenly sword technique. And did you know that Prince Jorah is his cousin? Did you really think that you stood a chance? You only have a middle-grade spirit body, and that's nothing special.
A spirit body was the physical manifestation of a person's will. It could take an almost infinite number of forms, which could be used to enhance someone's combat abilities. Not everyone was capable of producing spirit body, and even among those who could, some were more powerful than others. Freya wasn't at all impressed by Zane's.
I'll take this heavenly pill as compensation for the mental and physical trauma caused by having to put up with you.
Zane looked at her in confusion, still not understanding what was happening. Suddenly, a fierce-looking man stepped forward with a sharp blade, and he wasted no time in stabbing Zane right in his energy center, his heart.
Your middle-grade spirit body has outlived its purpose.
He taunted Zane. Zane shrieked as a wrenching pain surged through his heart, tearing him apart and filling him with hatred and despair. Slowly, he closed his eyes and slumped to the ground, slipping into a dark abyss.
Freya, why are you doing this to me?
Zane mumbled as he slowly regained consciousness. He opened his eyes and sprang up from the bed. His face was pale and clammy, and he felt persistent sharp pains all over his body. Initially, he had thought he had been having a nightmare, but he soon realized it had all been real. His cultivation, which was the development of his body, mind, and soul, had been destroyed. Cultivation was everything to those who practiced martial arts, as it allowed them to grow more powerful, develop new abilities, and sometimes become immortal.
My spirit body, my cultivation, they're all gone!
He exclaimed miserably. His eyes were red, and his entire body trembled uncontrollably with anger and grief as he recalled the events of his wedding day. He felt like he had been rendered useless from having his spirit body destroyed, and his cultivation dropped from the 7th stage to the 2nd stage. Having his vital energy destroyed meant that he wouldn't be able to cultivate for the rest of his life. As he sat there in anguish, a creak sounded across the room, and then the door opened. An attractive young woman walked in, and Zane immediately recognized Amara. They had grown up together, and she was like a sister to him. With a sigh, Amara proceeded to give him the bad news. After Freya had put Zane through such torture, and as he lay there in a coma, she had claimed all his properties as her own. All he was left with was a simple, modest house in the countryside where he was currently recovering.
I'm sorry this happened to you, but please don't worry about it right now. You need to rest, and we can talk about it later after you recover. I'll help you.
Amara said with a smile, holding his hand. After a moment of pause, she said,
Your father instructed me to take care of this before he left. Now that it's been returned to its rightful owner, I have fulfilled my obligation.
She felt sorry for Zane. It was clearly visible on her face as she handed over a square yellow pendant with the word dragon written on it.
Don't worry, Amara. I'll be okay.
Zane replied, forcing a smile to put her at ease. As he took the pendant, it flickered ever so slightly. After Amara had left the room, Zane tightened his grip on the pendant and his entire body began to tremble. He knew that Freya must have achieved a high-grade spirit body after swallowing the heavenly pill that she had stolen from him, and that angered him. Her wicked act would have attracted the attention of the elite members of the Martell family, and the speed of her cultivation would have increased by leaps and bounds. Meanwhile, Zane was disheartened and weak, and all he could do was lie on the bed in the dark, shabby house, devoid of all dignity. Zane and Bram were heirs to the Martell family, and both possessed exceptional talent. They had been known as the ultimate duo, but Zane had been more powerful than Bram, until his vital energy had been destroyed. He felt hopeless as he remembered that he would no longer be able to cultivate. He shuddered as he thought about how happy Freya and Bram were together. His grip on the pendant grew tighter and tighter until it broke in half. Startled, he looked down at it and noticed a small yellow flame emanating from the middle of it. The flame quickly rose into the air and grew larger, expanding to several times its original size, and before he knew what was happening, it had completely enveloped him. He felt like the room was spinning and he soon grew dizzy. When he finally regained his senses, he found himself in a chaotic scene. Looking up, he saw that he was surrounded by shining stars of all different colors, while beneath his feet was scorched soil. He could feel the heat from the sparks flying around him, and there was a pungent burning smell that made him wrinkle his nose in disgust. As he lifted his head, he saw a towering sign that looked incredibly ancient. Upon the sign were the words, "Dragon Prison."
Those who enter this dragon prison are destined for greatness.
An ethereal voice called out. Startled, Zane shrank back and a chill ran down his spine. The disembodied voice continued.
If you cultivate my devouring dragon technique, then you can enter the wisdom chamber and inherit my legacy. Young man, you must cherish this opportunity.
The sound reverberated in the air for a long time, and Zane stood frozen in shock until it diminished. As the voice gradually faded, a red and black scroll suddenly appeared in the air. When it rolled open, streams of light circled it in a bizarre yet breathtaking sight. A blast of air exploded around Zane, making him feel like he was falling into a terrifying abyss, and he began to panic. It was only then that he noticed the words on the scroll, and as he read them, he realized it was the devouring dragon technique that the voice had mentioned. He didn't immediately extend his hand to take it. Instead, he cautiously studied it as it hung in the air. He tried shouting out to the voice, but no answer came. After hesitating for a while, he finally reached out to grab the scroll, which seemed to fall right into his hand. As he flipped it open again, the dazzling words of the devouring dragon technique transformed into silver lights that jumped off the page and burrowed between his eyebrows and into his head. He felt his head getting heavier and heavier until it felt like it was about to burst. He clutched at his temples, screaming with pain. He was grateful that the agony only lasted a short while before disappearing, but when it did, he was left lying on the ground, utterly shocked. Covered in sweat, he was breathing heavily, but then his expression turned to one of sheer joy when he realized what had happened.
So that's the power of the devouring dragon technique. Freya, Bram, just you wait. I'm going to take back everything you stole from me.
The silver lights that had entered his brain had given him knowledge about the training method and introduction to the first level of the devouring dragon technique. According to the scroll, once he achieved the first level of the technique, he would then be able to cultivate the dragon spirit body. As his speed of cultivation and martial arts skills increased, he would become extremely powerful, and the dragon spirit body would grow even stronger. But what excited him the most was that he would be able to repair his shattered energy center. The dragon prison stretched for thousands of miles of seemingly desolate land. Lava-like red light peeked through the cracks in the ground, and Zane could feel the flying sparks and heat in the air. Not far away, thousands of mysterious, colorful squares were lined up on the ground. Their light was constantly flowing, but it was different from the color of the dragon prison.
Those must be part of the wisdom chamber,
Zane muttered, narrowing his eyes. His gaze grew intense as he looked at the squares of light. According to what he had just learned, as long as he cultivated the first level of the devouring dragon technique, he would be able to open the wisdom chamber and obtain the reward within. Sitting on the ground in a cross-legged position, he began to cultivate his vital energy according to the circulation method described in the devouring dragon technique. The weak airflow over his body began to strengthen, and a numb feeling spread from his energy center to his limbs and bones, making him feel extremely comfortable. Gradually, the broken parts of his body began to repair themselves, and he could feel his strength returning. He sat like that for a long time, letting the technique do its work. As Zane concentrated on healing himself, thick dark clouds gathered over the Martell mansion. The storm slowly spread until it covered all of Kintyre County, and deafening thunderclaps and bright lightning bolts split the air. The gloomy sky created a bleak atmosphere over the whole area, and it continued to get worse. Roaring thunder reverberated in the air, and the mountains and rivers seemed to tremble as if caught in an earthquake. Everyone in the county began to feel fearful and uneasy, but no one could predict what was coming. Many miles away, a middle-aged man with a crooked nose watched the storm develop. He wore a green robe with a roaring azure dragon on the back, and although he didn't normally unleash his powers deliberately, anyone could tell that he was a legendary warrior just by looking at him. He sat in a palace on top of Burial Mountain, which was shrouded in a hazy mist. Daylight couldn't reach the place, so it was always dark and gloomy. He looked solemn as he squinted in the direction of Kintyre County, and then he frowned, feeling both worried and surprised.
The sky is filled with dragon energy.
He told one of his assistants.
Either a rare treasure is being born, or someone is cultivating an astonishing skill.
He decided that it was a great opportunity for the Azure Dragon Academy, so he ordered his assistant to go and check it out. Similar events were happening throughout the Yarrow Kingdom and the surrounding countries, but Zane was unaware of it all. Inside the dragon prison, Zane opened his eyes, which shone with an odd silver light. His aura had risen to a whole new level, taking him to the third stage of body tempering, which was the process of improving his physical strength and stamina. He had healed the injury to his energy center 2 days earlier, and as he inspected the changes in his body, he became excited.
Not only have I reached the third level of body tempering, but I've also achieved the first level of the devouring dragon technique and acquired the dragon spirit body. This is amazing.
He turned his gaze to the wisdom chamber, which was glowing with colorful lights.
I should be able to open that chamber now.
Zane made his way over to the chamber, eventually coming to a stop in front of the pitch-black entrance. Suddenly, he found himself in a small room. As he looked around, he spotted someone standing across the room, a ghost-like figure. He could see through them, and he couldn't make out their facial features. The person remained motionless, and there wasn't even the slightest fluctuation of vital energy in their body. Next to them was a round stone tablet, and when Zane took a closer look, he could see words written on it. It read Dark Shadow, the great decryptor with infinite uses. Zane studied the Dark Shadow, wondering what it was, but since he couldn't make sense of it, he decided to withdraw from the dragon prison so that Amara wouldn't worry about him. Back in the outside world, things were even livelier than usual. The phenomenon that had occurred a few days earlier had become the hottest topic in every household. Many people were speculating about some kind of treasure in Kintyre County. Experts from all over the country were searching for it, but Zane was completely unaware of the fuss he had unknowingly caused. Just as he returned from the dragon prison, the door to his room burst open, and a robust and imposing young man entered. The man walked in as though he owned the place, and he sneered as soon as he saw Zane.
So you're awake? Well, I guess that'll make things a lot easier for me. Give me all the resources you've obtained from the Martell family over the years. Whatever's left of it anyway.
He sneered as he stared at Zane. But Zane wasn't at all intimidated. He squinted at the man in confusion as he realized who he was.
Taniks?
Zane frowned.
What's the meaning of this? What are you talking about?
Taniks was taken aback for a moment, and then his arrogant smile grew wider.
It seems that you haven't heard the news.
He chuckled.
The day after you were poisoned, the Council of Elders stripped you of your birthright and canceled all your funds. Bram is now the only heir to the Martell family.
As Zane gaped at him in surprise, Taniks resumed speaking. His tone was cheerful and aloof, and he clearly meant to provoke Zane. Although Zane was prepared for the news, he still trembled with fury. He clenched his fists, holding back the rage welling up within him. He and Bram were the most skilled members of the Martell family. They were the most promising martial artists in Kintyre County, yet Zane suddenly found himself being bullied by someone weaker than he was. He didn't care about his status as the heir or the resources that the treacherous elders had taken from him. But he couldn't lose the opportunity to join the Imperial Army. His father, Ezekiel, had disappeared 5 years earlier at Burial Mountain, where the Five Spirits sect resided, and only by joining the Imperial Army would he have any chance of finding some answers. Jumping out of his bed, he stomped toward Taniks.
Get out of here!
Zane yelled, his aura shooting out. Taniks was shocked. After all, he had heard that Zane's cultivation had dropped to the second stage of body tempering, so he wondered how he could already be back up to the third stage. As Taniks stood there, a surging power rolled through Zane's body like a torrent of waves, and he clenched his fist until his bones made a cracking sound. Then he stepped forward and sent his fist flying into Taniks' face. Taniks staggered backward, holding a hand to his face as he looked at Zane in dazed confusion. His mouth hung open in shock and his heart began to race.
How is this possible? I've already reached the 4th stage of body tempering, so my physical strength should be much higher than yours. How are you doing this?
The realm of body tempering had a total of 9 stages. The first 3 stages, collectively called the refinement of skin, were the basis of martial arts, and the middle 3 stages, the forging of bones, could be used to heal and create new strong bones. Meanwhile, the final 3 stages, the cleansing of the body, cleansed the body and harnessed the seed of vital energy. Once the seed of vital energy broke out of its shell, it would be possible to enter the foundation level. At that time, anyone could become a warrior capable of using vital energy from the world around them. Above the foundation level were the intermediate and advanced levels. Foundation-level practitioners were often conquerors in the Yarrow Kingdom. Meanwhile, the intermediate-level practitioners were peerless experts, and the advanced level seemed to be mere legend. Tanix was still standing in front of Zane when a tremendous wave of energy poured over him. He didn't know how Zane was doing it, but he was somehow causing an intense pain to shoot through Tanix's body. Crying out in pain, he slumped to the floor, unable to bear the agony any longer. As he curled up in a ball, he looked up at Zane with pleading eyes.
Please forgive me. I'm sorry for offending you.
Zane glared down at him.
Get out of my sight.
Tanix ran off, desperate to get away. Zane smiled as he began to concoct a plan. Since he had lost his status as his family's heir, he wouldn't be allowed to participate in the upcoming big martial arts competition. But he knew that there were other ways to qualify for the contest, and one of them was to go to the Assembly of Stars at the Starlight Tower in 10 days. As Amara ran into the room, she was pleasantly surprised to see Zane there.
You're back!
She exclaimed, a little out of breath.
Where have you been? I was so worried.
Zane's heart melted as he looked at Amara, knowing that she might be the only person in the entire Martell family who was concerned about him. Amara's expression darkened as she began to speak.
The family has cut us off. Our finances are non-existent.
Zane frowned, aware that they would have to find a way to make money quickly. After thinking for a few moments, he took a pill from his chest pocket. The pill emitted a faint blue light and an alluring medicinal scent that Amara recognized right away. She shook her head in protest.
You can't. The marrow purifying pill is too precious to sell. You need to keep it to improve your cultivation.
Zane had been given the pill when he was still a part of the Martell family, and he had always kept it close. Only he and Bram were allowed to possess the rare pills, which were issued every 6 months, and there were currently only 6 of them within the entire Martell family. Alchemists were rare in the Yarrow Kingdom, so it was difficult to acquire such pills, but the Martells always found a way to get their hands on a few of them. After all, marrow-purifying pills allowed them to speed up the body tempering process, so they were incredibly useful.
Don't worry.
Zane assured her, holding up the little pill.
I have a plan.
He knew that the dark shadow in the dragon prison had many uses, so he hoped to be able to replicate the pill with its help.
You can rest assured that I'll solve our financial problems.
He yelled out as he ran off. Amara didn't know what he was planning, but she hoped he was right. Zane found an isolated place and quickly went back into the dragon prison. It was as hot and stifling as ever, but he wasted no time in making his way to the dark shadow and trying to figure out how to use it. When he took the marrow-purifying pill from his pocket, it began to vibrate in his hand. As he watched in confusion, it flew up and hovered in the air. Suddenly, the dark shadow extended its hand and plucked the pill out of the air. Zane was shocked, and he felt like he was witnessing a miracle. As the dark shadow raised its hand, a brilliant light flashed, and a gray cauldron appeared. A colorful light surged within it as it revealed its secrets. Inside were a variety of medicinal ingredients that Zane hadn't even heard of, but before he could react, flames appeared beneath the vessel. The shadow stirred the concoction and controlled the heat to refine the ingredients before condensing them into a familiar pill. Watching the dark shadow's movements gave Zane goosebumps, as he had never seen such an astounding sight. He had known it would be a difficult process, but he had no idea how complex it was going to be. Alchemists were rare for just that reason. There were 3 things that they had to control precisely: heat, refinement, and condensation. Getting the optimal temperature, removing any impurities, and condensing the liquid into pill form had to be done with extreme precision. A single mistake at any step of the process could result in an explosion. At best, all the pills would be wasted, and at worst, the world would lose another alchemist. But the dark shadow did everything so effortlessly that there seemed little risk of that. An image flashed through Zane's mind as the dark shadow completed making the pill, and suddenly, he knew everything the shadow knew. The process of refining the marrow-purifying pill made sense, as though he had made it himself 1,000,000 times. He was even familiar with the subtlest and most complex parts of the process.
Blood essence grass, panax root, red clove, heart fruit.
As he recited the ingredients, he also recalled all their characteristics and uses. He was ecstatic as he realized how much new knowledge he had gained, and he wondered if he might even become an alchemist. All the alchemists he had heard of were highly revered, and he was thrilled to think that he could be too. But he didn't want to get ahead of himself, so he forced himself to calm down. Although he didn't know where the dragon prison and the dark shadow came from, he knew they were the keys to his future success. He thought about the heavenly sword technique that he had previously cultivated, and he wondered if he could get it back. It was a low-grade, yellow-rank martial arts technique that the Martells had been cultivating for generations. There were 2 levels of the technique to cultivate after the foundation level. The first was the art of sword drawing, and the second was the separation of vital energy. Before Freya had destroyed Zane's energy center, he had already mastered the art of sword drawing almost to perfection. The dark shadow began to move, interrupting Zane's thoughts. A long silver sword appeared out of thin air, and the shadow picked it up and waved it. The sharp blade flashed, appearing to slice the space around it and making everything change color. Even though it didn't contain a trace of vital energy, Zane still sensed its viciousness. It wasn't a sword for fighting, but for killing. Once drawn, the blade demanded to take a life.
This art of sword drawing puts my previous prowess to shame.
He muttered. He felt a little numb, and his entire body began to tremble involuntarily. Compared to the art of sword drawing he was watching, his was mere child's play. The dark shadow repeatedly sheathed and drew its sword. Its actions became increasingly sharp and fast, until eventually Zane was able to see them more clearly. When the shadow drew its sword, it seemed to create a causal effect that encompassed the principles of all things in the universe. Zane's mind was being bombarded with new knowledge and awareness, and he became almost one with the dark shadow as he practiced the art of sword drawing over and over. Each time he drew his sword, it caused a tremendous change in the world.